With both engines out, the priority is to keep the plane gliding as far as necessary. To do that, pilots can change the angle of their windmilling propellers.
You have the maximum glide performance when you minimize the drag. It's very important to feather the propeller in order to reduce the drag.
Feathering the props involves changing their angle against the wind. The maneuver reduces drag.
When you want to feather the propeller in flight, you first have to reduce the power lever to idle and put the condition lever back to feather position.
The crew did not feather their props when their engines quit. The windmilling propellers created enormous drag. If the crew of Flight 1153 had feathered their props, they may have been able to glide further than they did.
Let's get to 17,000 feet.
By the time Captain Godbee's second engine flamed out, he was just below 22,000 feet. To further reduce drag at that altitude, the plane should be slowed to 158 miles per hour, the ATR-72's ideal gliding speed. Surprisingly, to glide as far as possible, a pilot doesn't want to fly as fast as possible. The faster a plane flies, the more the airflow pushes against it, creating resistance. Every plane has an optimal speed to achieve the furthest glide. The crew continued flying up to 55 miles an hour faster than their optimal gliding speed. That added to the drag on the plane and reduced the distance they could glide. By feathering his props and reducing his speed, a simulator pilot in France was able to get the plane as far as Palermo.
You with me, Ellie? Huh? Careful.
Flight 1153 hit the water 26 miles from shore, well short of what the plane was capable of achieving. The simulation confirmed that the crew might have been able to make it to land.
It was theoretically possible to reach the coast, but it was also very difficult to achieve that result.
Simulator pilots had one big advantage over the crew of Flight 1153. They weren't in a life or death situation, and they knew they had to glide instead.
Fuel supply, check.
But Captain Garbee didn't know he was out of fuel. He didn't think he'd need to glide to Palermo. Garbee focused on restarting the engines instead. Feathering the props isn't part of that procedure. If the captain had known he was out of fuel, he might have acted to maximize glide instead. Once he realized that his engines wouldn't start, his focus was on trying to find a place to ditch the plane. Captain Garbee also had to contend with a lack of instruments, as well as radio interruptions.
TY 1153.
What is your fuel load?
Cockpit fuel quantity, 1,800 kilograms.
Most importantly, Captain Garbee had the lives of his 34 passengers to consider.
Of course, it's much easier to cope with that kind of situation on the simulator, because if you do wrong, if you crash the aircraft, you have the magic button, right, reset, everything is okay again. And that's very different in the real life with passengers behind and when it's your life.
Your distance
Is now 20 miles.
We're not going to make it.
The simulation highlights the importance of proper training to deal with unlikely situations, such as a twin-engine flameout.
In aviation, is a very rare event.
Vincenzo Panetta's report urges airlines to train their pilots how to ditch without engine power. Better pilot training is just one of 17 safety recommendations in the accident report. Perhaps the most important, that ATR redesigned the fuel quantity indicator.
In order to prevent a fuel quantity indicator type 42 on a 72 aircraft and vice versa.
To prevent mechanics from installing the incorrect part, Panetta believes that the only answer is to design the FQIs so that they only fit on the plane they're meant for. 9 men face charges of criminal negligence for the downing of Flight 1153, including the tune-inter mechanic who installed the wrong FQI and Captain Garbi.
I'll get it to you when you get back from Jerba.
Roger that.
There is no single cause of the accident. This accident, like many other aircraft accidents, was determined by a series of action, a series of events linked one to each other.
È inaudita una cosa del genere.
This is unheard of.
Avrei accettato di più se si fosse rotto un motore.
I would have accepted the engine breaking or a window shattering. But to have people die because of a lack of fuel?
Persone perché manca di carburante su un aereo.
Attempt to restart the engine.
The crash of Flight 1153 was caused by a series of grave errors on the ground and in the air. But the flight data recorder does show that the crew's last move before hitting the water was absolutely perfect.
Here we go.
According to the available evidences, the flight data recorder and also some statements released by the crew that survived, the aircraft touched the sea first with the rear part of the aircraft at an altitude which is compatible with the optimum pitch altitude of the aircraft, which is 9 degrees.
Captain Garbi raised the plane's nose up to 9 degrees at the last possible moment. So instead of ploughing into the sea, his plane glided along the surface of the water. The maneuver likely saved lives by allowing more passengers to escape the ruined aircraft. His flying may have prevented this accident from becoming an even greater tragedy.